Hola, hola, hola. Hola, hola. Sí? Se sent? Sí? Anglès, català, castellà... Jo prefereixo anglès perquè és com la tinc assajada i les slides i tot. Si no fem un acte de fe. Vale, dues coses abans de començar. Perdoneu el retard, vinc de fora de Barcelona i a vegades passen aquestes coses. A més, l'empresa on treballo avui és el nostre equivalent a un Cyber Monday perquè fem és una agència de viatges i avui és el Travel Tuesday. Llavors avui ha sigut una mica de festival. Abans de començar, i com a segue del Ferran, jo abans treballava per una empresa que va fer el software que va fer el framework per Starbucks, per la targeta d'estrelletes. I després de fer el llançament va sortir un post molt guai que diu que Starbucks ara mateix podria ser considerat el quart banc més important dels Estats Units per la quantitat de 36 euros que tenen allà guardant de parador. I amb això ja està. Fa 40 anys, la Roser Capdevila, que és una il·lustradora catalana, va publicar el primer llibre de les tres bessones. Havia d'anglès i m'he fotut en català. Someone doesn't understand Catalan? No? No problem. The Starbucks story, and we can skip that part? 40 years ago, Catalan illustrator Roser Capdevila published the first story of the triplets. The triplets are three non-fictional characters. It's fictional story, but non-fictional characters. They are based on her daughters, the triplets. They were an immediate success, translated to multiple languages, available in multiple countries worldwide. And the story for the triplets, or each book of the triplets, goes like this. The boring witch is bored, so she decides to go and check on the triplets. The triplets happen to be messing something up or playing some kind of practical joke or prank, and so the boring witch takes the kids away and casts them into a well-known novel or story. The story happens to be twisted, or the kids mess it up, more or less like Marty McFly messes up the past in Back to the Future. And the boring witch also jumps into that story to try to teach the kids some kind of moral, or then some things happen, depending on the story, but eventually the triplets fix everything, and the boring witch brings them back, right? No news. Everyone here knew the triplets, more or less, right? Perfect. This is what the Wikipedia has to say about what I just explained, and I will read at the same time that you are reading internally. It goes like this. The plot of the triplet sisters follows a definite pattern. Sometimes they play some prank or manage to annoy the bored witch, and to punish them, she sends them into a classic tale, legend, or children's adults, such as Frankenstein or the Phantom of the Opera, literary work. The main structure of the classic remains, but some twists, often hilarious anachronisms, such as shadowing the 40 thieves getting distracted from robbing a house by a camel race or a TV, or Dr. Frankenstein as veterinarian, are introduced to favor each plot and define the sisters' personalities. What would I do if I were a Wikipedia editor? Blah, blah, blah. Sometimes they play some prank, Oxford comma, or manage to annoy the bored witch, period. New sentence, breathing. As a punishment, comma, no pronoun, she sends them into a classic tale, blah, 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 no example, literary work. And all this part, which is more than half the paragraph, I would put it away somewhere else, right? Put another way, I would have focused on the plot structure, I would have explained the examples on a separate follow-up paragraph, and I would kept sentences shorter and simpler. Or, put another way, and this is not the perfect audience, but bear with me, I would have put production code in source min, I would have put test code in source test, and I would have used smaller functions that I can compose, right? Let's read again. I used a numbered list because the order matters. And we've all done HTML, and we know that there's two types of lists. So if the order matters, use a list and use some numbering. If the order doesn't matter, but it's a list, use a list. And as I was telling you to use a list, use imperative. Tell your users, tell your readers to do this. Don't hint, don't suggest, don't play the past. Just use imperative. It's fine. One thing that you should never do, though, is to use the passive form, except when there's no subject. Why is the board which board? No one knows. No one cares. It's a fact. Why is the story twisted? It's not relevant for the story, so, well, sometimes you can use passive form, but always prefer direct form over passive unless there's no other choice. But what just happened for the past 6 minutes? I started playing slides like there was no tomorrow, right? So never do that ever again. Follow a pattern, and this is the preferred pattern. State your audience, because if I prepared some content with some audience in mind and you don't match that audience, you should know early on. So you say, oh, that's not for me. You just go and use your time elsewhere. Manage expectations. On this talk, you will learn this and you will learn that, and I will cover these topics. Deliver the content, review the expectations, and finally, offer some follow-up ideas, links, etc., etc. And I'm talking about a presentation, but this completely the same pattern applies to documentation, tutorials, reference manuals, anything. For a presentation, there's a small change, which is introduce yourself. Sometimes at the end, sometimes at the beginning, usually at the beginning, depends on the person. So, let's start over. I was waiting for you. Welcome. I'm super happy to be here. This is not BCN engineering talk. Sorry about that. There was an issue with my edits. I delivered this talk last week on that other meetup. This talk is called The Emperor Has No Dogs. My name is Ignacio Mauricio Moncloa Español. And you're asking, and who is that guy? I've never seen that person on this meetup. It's obvious you haven't seen me here often or ever, because I'm a developer. I'm a level 23 developer. You can recognize me by that avatar, and I usually identify myself as breaker of things. That's why you should wear protective glasses. Recently, I mutated my title into software detective because I spent a lot of time dealing with crime scenes. But who am I not? I'm not a graphics designer, so don't expect anything flashy or even consistent. Today, I will deliver a lot of content, not super fancy, not super entertaining. There's about 170 slides. I'll run through some of it. Hopefully, bear with me. So here we go. I said that this audience, that it's a good practice to start explicitly stating the target audience. So the target audience that I expect today, you here, are senior developers, junior developers, remote workers, C-level people, mob programmers, anyone. About what to expect on the talk today? Well, if you've read the meetup page, you will see, you will have seen that I already said what I would deliver, right? This is a screenshot from the meetup invite. There's 3 paragraphs and a title. And the important part is these 2 paragraphs here. And this font, typeface, is so small that I will simplify it for you. What these 2 paragraphs say is exactly these 5 bullet points. And they go like this. First, I will talk about my journey from not writing docs to writing docs. Then I will share some tips and tricks that work for me. Which habits I developed to never forget and not fall back to not writing documentation. When and who to convince that documentation can be a way to save money. And finally, how to convince your peers to altogether adopt a writing culture. So let's start over. Let's start. As I said, I'm a level 23 developer, but I was not always that, right? Several years ago, I was just a plain squire living downhill in a small village. And every morning I would have to walk to uphill, up the castle, enter the walls, and man the horses. Or, in developer terms, I would read specs, code, test, and write docs, except everyone knows that's not true. That's more close to the truth, right? I would just read a bit of the specs and then code, deploy. Oh shit, something's broken. I messed up production, roll back, read the specs again. Hopefully, maybe some tests, not true. And of course, no documentation at all. And I would do this day in and 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 day in. I felt like I was on a remolino, a whirlpool. I was just there trapped, like the guy in the movie. And like the guy in the movie, I said, okay, I have to better myself. I have to get out of here. So I started attending meetups. I started learning about testing. I started doing coding katas. I started reading books, etc., on how programming patterns and DevOps and whatnot. But even with all this effort, this last part here was missing. Sure, I improved my reading skills and I improved my team skills so that I would collaborate over tests before I went and wrote code. I would ask for more reviews than I used to. I would not trust my instincts as much. But I still felt like a squire. I was still missing something. And then one morning, on my walk from the village to the castle, I met these three down the tree. And I said to them, hey, who are you guys? It's the first time that I see you here. I walk past this tree every single day, every single evening, and you're never here. Oh, we're new. And we're here for you, Ignacio. And I said, what do you mean you're here for me? Sure. We heard you need some help, and we're here to offer that help. Oh, you're messing my story. No, we're fixing it. Okay. Tell them all the stuff, blah, 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 the whirlpool, Groundhog Day, completely stuck. And what they said to me was this: Ignacio, you need a kick. What do you mean, a kick in my boss? No. You need a kick. You need someone to push you out of this whirlpool. And we're here, and we will help you develop this kick. But you have to put some effort on your end. And this effort works like this. Try to focus on that thing that you want to improve and just do that. What do you mean? Yeah. Just the documentation for several days or even weeks, right? I was lucky that I was in a company that was doing open source software, and I joined the company immediately after a major release. And the first thing that all the team was doing when I joined was do a full swipe of all the existing documentation. And that was great. I could focus on documenting. And that was the goal. And the great thing is that I learned all the intricacies of the product, of the framework, without reading a single line of code. That was brilliant. As I was doing PRs for all this documentation, I realized that all my peers were several steps ahead of me. They had been doing that for way longer. So I started looking for other resources. How did I learn testing? I read about testing. How did I learn about coding? I read and practiced, and I read and practiced. So that's some of the resources that I usually recommend. The 4 Cs, because in IT, no one can use naming correctly, and the DBO system. Let's see about this. The 4 Cs model is a way to document at 4 layers: context, container, component, and code. Context, in my example, in my current employment, I would tell you that I work at an OTA that has 4 BUs, but you probably don't know what these acronyms are, so I will tell you that it's an online travel agency that has 4 business units. It's very broad, and maybe has some interaction points. And then there's container, component, and code. And what they do is they keep telling you to just narrow down the scope. So in container, I would tell you about bookings, recommendations, flights. In component, I would tell you the details of hotel bookings. And then in code, it's what we're familiar with. I document a piece of code. Let's talk about the 4 C's of effective. It's completely unrelated, very confusing naming, but it means that your documentation has to be clean, clear, concise, and complete. Sorry, clear, correct, concise, and complete. And if you've done some coding in the past, it probably will sound familiar because it's the same properties that your code must have. If it's not correct, there's a bug. If it's not clear, it's unmaintainable. If it's not complete, it's not finished, etc., etc., etc. Right? And finally, third resource, the DBA system, it states a way to organize your documentation. It's one way. There's others. There's one that has 12 categories, whatever. I know this one. I like this one. And it goes like this. Tutorials. Assume your user knows nothing, your reader knows nothing, and tell that person to go from nothing to something that works with all the necessary shortcuts. Install it, install, run, copy-paste, execute, compile, whatever. Get them up and running as fast as you can. Then, when you have them here, start with the how-tos. And how-tos take you from point A to point B. I have this machine in AWS already allocated, and now I'm adding the ingress. And now I'm adding a database, and I'm connecting my application here. And now that I have the database, I'm adding the ingress, right? It's different how-tos. And the user, because we are targeting people with some background, with some degree, will know how to more or less connect the dots, right? That's different from a tutorial. Then we have the explanation. The explanation is the whole literature, the thing that we think about when we talk about documentation. I use a persistence framework called Hibernate. Not true, I use something that's way more modern, but I go to the Hibernate manual. That's the explanation. And the reference is every single method, every single argument and parameter, whatever, and the return time and whatnot. It's 2 different things. One lives in the code, the other lives in the web, right? So, learn, but for the general audience, even outside of IT, my favorite one is the one for last, it's the bonus, it's the Google Tech Writing courses. These courses are just brilliant. 1 hour of your time, you will never go back. That's not exactly true. It says 2 hours, 1 hour, whatever. It's super fast, less than 1 afternoon. The last 2, if you're not doing hardcore UI, maybe you don't need them, but the first 2 are very, very good. Spoiler, this is so good that all the slides in blue about the triplets are a summary of that Google course. For example, to use order list or not use order list, or to use this template for your content. That's so good that I start my talk with. So at this point, I was no longer a squire. I had acquired all this knowledge, and I was now a guard at the castle. I lived at the catacombs in the castle, but I still had to improve myself. I had this knowledge, but I didn't adopt it yet on my daily tasks. And fair enough, I went to see the triplets, and they said, guys, I need your help. Sure, no worries. What you need now is some tricks so that you don't have to pay the cost of the context switching from coding to documenting. So the first thing that you need to fight, you need to be aware of the blank page syndrome. The blank page syndrome is the blockage that anyone has when I have an empty file and I need to start writing some code, when I have an empty Word document and I have to start something, right? Once you fight that, and we will go to that later, just do small improvements. In a month, you'll have more documentation if you did 1 paragraph each day than if you did the whole documentation at the end of the month, right? Focus on the small improvements and have your team help you push this very quickly. Get the dopamine of pressing the green button of the PRs in GitHub, right? Another thing that you could do to never forget to write documentation is to create tasks about documenting. We know that this is an anti-pattern. We no longer have on our Jira boards a task which is test this feature. It's part of the definition of done, right? So eventually, you will not need that task. But until then, create the task of writing this documentation. And not only that, do it first. Oh, but it's not implemented yet. I know, but you have the specification, so you have enough to write the documentation, right? Or practice explicitly. Do some katas every morning. Check the documentation and find a way to improve it, to extend it. Anytime you get a question over Slack, don't answer. Create the documentation, share the link, right? And if you pair with me, and if you squint a little, maybe not the best of the audiences, but if you squint a little, you will see that documentation is very similar to tests, except I don't need to compile them. They specify what the code does, right? So let's stretch this simile for a bit. You have to be clear, complete, concise, right? There are different layers when documenting, integration test, end-to-end, unit test, etc., etc. I'm suggesting that you do them first, more or less like on a TDD approach. Let's talk a bit more about doing them first. When you do documentation first, you focus on the words, on the language that you're using. You're programming in English, the different programming language. And when you focus on these words, you will very quickly realize that you need specific words to name things, and you will focus on name. You will not focus on logic and correctness of your code or whatever. But on top of that, you will also prevent the expert paradox. The expert paradox is a situation in which the person that knows how to explain something is completely incapable of explaining that something. The more you know, the harder it is for you to explain that thing. If you do documentation first, because there's no implementation yet, it's very, very, very difficult that your documentation will be coupled to your implementation, which is the biggest anti-pattern. So do documentation first, because there's no implementation, it will never be coupled. And because you will want to push this as fast as you can, you will focus on the facts, and that's the best documentation, the documentation that never changes. It's facts, right? An example, this is a piece of code that I did a few weeks ago with a colleague. Never mind what it does. What's relevant is that this method here, it's some Scala code, blah, 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 blah. It exists on 2 or 3 libraries. It's the exact same signature, but the behavior, the devil is on the details on how to deal with exceptional situation when one feature fails, when another feature fails, with the ordering and whatnot. And we were trying to solve a particular problem in which we had to deal with the errors in a particular way. And so we said, okay, let's not write this code. We know it will look like this. We don't know the content. Let's write the documentation. And that's what we did. We wrote some Java doc, some Scala doc. This method works like this, takes these inputs, produces this output. When this happens, that's the behavior. When that happens, that's the behavior. When this third situation happens, that's the behavior. And when we were convinced that these were all the possible failure modes and outcomes, we said, that's brilliant. That's exactly what my test should look like. That's what exactly my test should cover, should exercise. When this happens, that's the output. When that happens, that's the output. So we wrote the docs. From the docs, it was trivial to just write the test. And once you had the test, we had nothing else to do but write the code, which is trivial. But let's keep comparing docs and tests. In testing, we often say that 0% coverage is bad and 100% coverage is equally bad. So in documentation, we talk about salt on your meal. No docs or no salt means your code and your meal is bland, and if you put too much salt, you cannot eat it. So you have to find this sweet spot, even though it's salty. When it comes to roles, I'm a developer, I'm not a QA, and yet I write tests, right? I'm a developer, I'm not a technical writer, and yet I write docs, right? The fact that there's someone with this role on your team doesn't mean that you don't have to cover these responsibilities. You still have to. Outside in. In testing, outside, I do the end-to-end, I then do an iteration test, and then I focus on some unit tests. And then I step out, and then I step in, and then I step out, and then I step in. It's a practice for testing. Similar thing for documentation. Follow several layers, etc., etc. One thing of doing documentation first, or tests first, is that you are sitting on the user's seat, on the user's chair, right? When you write a test first, the only thing that you see from your code is the API. You know exactly how the user will interact with your code, your library, your framework, your whatever. So you know exactly what they will find, and you will realize that, oh, they won't have these arguments, they won't like it like this. So you change it. And you're doing it because you're developing this empathy. With documentation happens the same thing. If you write documentation first because you don't know anything, you're in the same position than the user reading that documentation for the first time. They don't know anything. So focus on answering the first questions that come to mind, right? Because documenting is a game of empathy. It's a conversation of the most difficult kind. I usually categorize conversation in 5 layers. Real-life conversation. I talk to you and I have verbal, non-verbal cues. I have visual feedback. You don't even have to say anything and I know where I'm going the right way or the wrong way. Then I have a call where I don't see you, so I have to wait for you to interrupt me and tell me, hey, Ignacio, what you're saying has no sense, makes no sense. Or we have messaging where we don't have this immediacy. Maybe it's a bit more asynchronous. And then we have email, in which I no longer know who this email will reach or when, and maybe there's your message coming back before I finish sending some other reply, and then he jumps into the conversation, so it's a complete mess. And then there's documentation, in which I only have one chance to tell you everything that I have to tell you, and I don't know who or when will read that. You write it once, and it can be read by anyone, anywhere. And you don't know this anyone anywhere. The most you can do is guess and hope. If you stated the audience at the beginning, that if that who reading is not the correct person, will say, that's not for me, and they will move on, right? One thing I didn't mention so far is that, to me, documentation is not just a PDF. You can also document a PR. And you can show some empathy to the reviewers, so that your PR will move faster, so that they will have the necessary information. And one thing about that, one very useful help for your reviewers is, I wrote the documentation first, now I'm writing the code. When I'm writing the code, I send the PR. And if you don't have the necessary context, here's a link with the full documentation that I already wrote. And I'm covering the first 3 paragraphs, right? Because I already have documentation, I can cross-link to that. And then the reviewer comes in and doesn't even have to ask anything. They have all the information that they needed, and they focus on the correctness of the code, right? So, do them first to fight the expert paradox, develop the ubiquitous language. Spend some time on your tool of choice, Draw.io, PowerPoint, Keynote, Remarkable, iPad, whatever, and do some basic drawing. So an image will be super helpful. It will make your wall of text a lot more pleasant to read. It's not just about conveying information, it's about not frying the reader's brain, okay? If you have the docs, cross-link to them all over the place. Keep the docs small and factual, so it's very easy to never have to maintain them again. And last thing about writing them first is that it will help you detect unknowns earlier. When we were discussing with this colleague about the signature and dealing with Scala futures, yada, 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 we realized that there was one edge case that we were not familiar with, and these other 2 libraries, we didn't even know how they solved it. So we went there, we investigated a bit more, and we realized that we were not aware, right? So you have the documentation, you have the test, you have discussed this, you have discussed that, you have the names for everything. And then when 90% of your task is done, you only need to write the code, right? And usually at this point, when I'm talking about this topic, people raise their hand, yeah, Ignacio, but you're talking about specifications. No. I'm not talking about specifications. Documentations are not specs. They are a different thing, and they are different types, right? And there's a type of document, a type of PDF, a write-up, whatever, which is, you, Pablo, have to do this feature, and it has to look like that. That's the specification, because the UI, UX team told you to do it like that. That's the specification. And the specification doesn't even have to tell you why. Yeah? So at this point, I was no longer a guard. I had acquired all these tricks, and I was promoted to castle archer. I even got a nice room with a view. There was no window, so it was cold at night, but it was fine. It was cozy, and I had some sunlight during the day. But I still sometimes forgot. I knew all the things that I had to fight. I had the knowledge to write the documentation, but sometimes I still forgot. And so, of course, what I did, I went for some help. And I asked the triplets again. And the triplets say, Ignacy, that's a very common question that's completely unrelated to documentation. But in your case, in any case, actually, but in your case specifically, what you need is you need to build some habits. And that's a completely different topic. And one of the ways people can build habits is by developing personal triggers. And a trigger is, when I observe this, I have to do that. When I do this, I have to prevent it doing that. It's a way to stop smoking. It's a way to fight dogs, right? So I started building some triggers, and here's some of them. When coding, I shouldn't check names. I shouldn't have to select names. So when I'm coding, if I don't know the name of something, I say foo, I literally type whatever, and then on the PR time, I will decide which is the perfect name, because I have the full algorithm complete, and I will know which is the best name for that whatever. So I no longer have classes called processor, which is the name that everyone uses for their class when they don't know what their class will do, right? Every single piece of software is a processor. It gets data and processes that into some other data. When waiting for the build to complete, write documentation. No, but my documentation is already written. I did that first. Yeah, improve it. When describing a PR, if you don't have a link to an actual documentation, it's because you didn't do that first. So spend that time there, right? And one last thing, anytime you're about to comment on a PR, do not comment, prefer suggesting. So for example, in this PR, there's a typo in this sentence here. Oh, there's a typo. No, don't do that. Just use the UI and prefer a suggestion. Who knows who uses GitHub here? No suggestions? Who uses suggestions? Nice. In this particular case, I would even go farther. Don't even put a messy suggestion for a stupid typo like this, because Titibilus, the demon at service of Satan, the guy, will always squeeze typos in your documentation. Accept it and live with it. Don't fight it. Don't be the guy that required one extra commit and a full build for a stupid typo like this one. Don't be the extra friction. There's enough builds. There's enough steps on every build to just run them all over, right? Be the yes and person. In improv theater, the improv rule says to never say no. Because when you say no, when you have two actors on the theater on stage, one is improvising and it's going some direction. When the other says no, he breaks my flow and the improv session ends. Never be the person to break someone else's flow. Always in a PR, push, help move forward, unless it's something big, unless it's an actual error in the docs, for not a typo, okay? More things on a blank page. Why? Why am I doing this? Why is the user reading this? Which is the most important question. Focus on that, commit, push, micro improvements later. This will help you beat the blank page syndrome. On a blank page, just to separate IDs, I have one ID for coding, one ID for documenting. In the ID for documenting, I have GitHub Copilot and some other AIs so that I can write a lot faster, because halfway through the sentence, autocomplete, boom, autocomplete, boom. Commit, push, press the green button, go for some coffee, and I have my merge done for the day already. Again, because documenting is a show of empathy, think of the user, think of the reader that's closest to you, And for example, on a PR, this is the flow that over the years I developed. Code, strange name, whatever, foo, this name must change. I don't care. Push. First, describe the PR. If I don't know what this PR does, maybe I'm not familiar enough with this code. Treat the PR as draft, and then be the reviewer yourself. Read it top to bottom from a reviewer point of view, not a submitter, an author. Read it there and comment things. Okay, if these 3 things should be changed, go and change them before the PR is ready for review. If these other 2 things, they must not change because reasons, state these reasons, because then the reviewer will come and say, oh, this is important and it has to remain like this because reason A, reason B. If there's 3,500 lines of changes and the most important is here, hey, review this first. All the rest is incidental complexity because renaming, because moving resources, whatnot, right? Help the others reinforce and adopt the documenting mindset, the writing culture, by explicitly thanking them for this extra effort. It's not something that everyone does, so when they do, just be the positive mark on them, right? More triggers, no acronyms. I shared 2 acronyms earlier, and I immediately switched because I know that none of you, I suspect that none of you works on an OTA, an online travel agency. And I don't know if you know what a BU is. Probably you do when I said business unit, but maybe on that context could have meant something else. So anytime you see an acronym, remove it and write the whole thing. Another trigger is never send before you've read. Write, read, and then send. Or even better, write, read, reduce, repeat, read, reduce, repeat, reduce, repeat, until it cannot be reduced anymore. And what do I mean by reduce? Use shorter sentences. Do not use adverbs. We are programmers, we are developers. We know about names, nouns, and verbs. There's no adverbs in code, are there? No, they're not. Adverbs have to go or have to be replaced with factual data, a link to some dashboard stating why this is faster, right? Or awesome, I don't care. Tell me, give me actual numbers, right? And when I talk about using shorter sentences, there's a caveat. Yes, use shorter sentences, but there's some theory on literature which is in red up here in this paragraph, every sentence has 5 words. I will not go into details, but if you read this, you will get bored very quickly. Instead, if you keep changing the length of the sentences and then suddenly use a short sentence, but then use a longer one, and you keep switching back and forth, your text will be more musical. I'm not saying that tomorrow you have to start writing documentation with this in mind, but now that I've told you, you will see it. And you will suffer it when you are reading something that's 3 sentences per paragraph, 25 lines per paragraph, and it's only 3 stops. And you will also suffer the opposite. And at this point, back in the castle, one day coming back from my meal, I met this guy, this sorcerer, and he said, Ignacy, you've learned about documentation, you've adopted documentation, and you've improved your habits so that the context switching is not an impediment. You are now worthy of the box. And he gave me the box. And I said, yeah, but what is this? I cannot tell you. What do you mean? You're giving me a magical artifact and it has no documentation, no user manual. Yeah, you know, I'm a magician, I'm busy. And I said, okay, whatever. So with all this knowledge and the magical box, I was no longer an archer, and I was now invited to the knighthood school. So every morning I will not man the stables, I will not guard the castle, I would now attend to become a knight of the realm. And with that, there was an extra perk. I now have access to the royals, to higher ups, the sea levels, you call them, right? And so I said, okay, you care about money. Ferran has been talking about money a lot. So let's talk about when documentation can save us money. This is a bullet point. Onboarding people, it's expensive. So spend time on wonderful onboarding material. Get people up to speed a lot faster. In the onboarding, squeeze in some ideas about how you are a company with a writing mindset, a writing culture. Squeeze in the course for Google Technical Writing, or even better, during the interviewing process, do some part on writing, not so much coding systems, IT, whatever. There's this company now that is doing part of their interviews over Slack. They create an ad hoc channel, they have a candidate, and they just chat with that person because they have a feeling of how a daily interaction with that person will be. They are remote first, so it makes a perfect sense. Use the improv rule. Push something before adding more friction. It takes time to just fix a typo and send another commit, right? Reinforce the positive behaviors unless it's introducing some bugs, right? Once you have these onboarding improvements, consider making the first task for a new hire to be related to documentation. So they are familiar with the documentation. They know their way around the documentation so that when they have some question about the feature, they know where to find the answer. And when they develop some new feature, they know where to improve the documentation, right? Why do we keep pushing people to implement this new feature and get familiarity with the code? No. The documentation is equally important. Okay? Is another bullet point. And this is this slide for the audience today. Anything that cannot be Googled has to be documented. And today, people from platform, people from IT, people developing internal tools for developers are the audience for this slide. If I cannot Google, it has to be documented. I have to have enough resources to find my way around without having to fire up Slack and say, hey, guys, I need some help with this and that and whatnot, right? Other things that you have to document, SOPs and deployment, SOPs, standard operating procedures, trigger, no acronyms, or deployment processes. It's something that's super particular to the company when I'm working on, so it's something that I cannot Google. This is another bullet point. Another way to save money is for people to not have to ask around for things. So make your documentation discoverable. Anytime you write some documentation, every time you finish some feature, you do a demo of the feature, and then the documentation has to follow the same feature, the same flow. Tell everyone that this exists, announce it to the world, okay? Or make it more discoverable, follow some conventions. This type of audience will find the information on README or the docs folder, or that type of audience should have their documentation on Confluence, the wiki page, and whatnot. And everything about the inventory of services has to be in Rody, Backstage, you name it, right? Follow this convention. Or, even better, make things a bit more discoverable. In my current employer, we use Confluence, and there's a hidden feature, which is in Confluence, you can search emojis. And that's super nice, because now, anytime I write a how-to manual, it's books, how-to, with this capitalization, and very consistent, do something. Or reference manual. Books manual, something. And I search by books, and I have everything I need. Reference manual, user manual, reference manual, user manual, how-to guides, tutorial, right? Or even better, like Ferran said, on your dashboards, links all over the place. I love that. This is some dashboard that some engineer on call may not be familiar with, and they are here because they got a page at 3 a.m. Give them all the information that they need on their face. Top left, most important part of the page, links to places. Or even better than links, copy the relevant information in place, right? In software, we have the dry something pattern or whatever practice. Don't repeat yourself. No. If you focus on the documentation first, if your documentation was factual, copy paste it all over the place. It will never change. And if it changes, you will have a bigger problem. You've changed the universe, you've changed the conditions, the invariants, so you will have to deal with a lot more, right? Put it there. These 5 sentences explain all you need to know about these two donuts, right? So convention is good, discoverability is better, links are better, in-place documentation is best of them all. So at this point, I had no more arguments for the higher-ups, the royals, people of the money. I graduated knighthood. But something happened. I had been talking about documentation for quite a while. I had been talking with higher-ups who have power to discuss and create some new policies. So, of course, some peers got a bit annoyed, and I saw a mob coming my way with pitchforks and torches, and I thought they were coming to just slit my throat or something. They were coming my way. I was very scared, and just 2 meters away from me, they stopped, and I said, Ignacio, we need your help. And I'm like, you're not here to help me. No, we have bigger problems today. What are you talking about? There's a dragon attacking the village. And you need my help? Oh, come on, you just graduated from knighthood school. You're the best we have. So yeah, you'll have to just go talk to the princess regent, and she'll tell you what to do. So fair enough, I went and talked to the princess regent, and she said, Ignacio, I hereby command you, knight of the village, now go and kill the dragon. Meanwhile, of course, the dragon has been doing dragon things and emitting dragon fires and stuff like that. There's a strong smell of burnt chicken in the air. And so what I do, I jump on a horse out of the wall, sunset, I get out of the horse, I face the dragon, I pee my pants, and prepare to fight. And the dragon attacked first. And he said, Ignacio, but documentation is hard to maintain. Yeah. But undocumented code is harder to maintain. And then he attacked immediately and said, but I don't know what to explain or how much detail. And he said, no, it's fine. It's fine. Just focus on the why. Some documentation is better than no documentation. It's like the salt, right? Yeah, but this code is very stable and no one will edit it. Yeah, but have you ever heard about tail or ls? They've been out for 20 years and people still need to learn how to use them. So even if it's very stable, your users will outlive you, hopefully. Don't know where to store the documentation, Ignacio. Where should I put it? I don't care. Just write something and eventually we will refactor it. It's like code. Create features and then we'll split it, we'll refactor, we'll improve it, we'll microservices. I don't care. Yeah, but it takes time. I like this one because I have this talk that I've been delivering for the past hour that can help you, all right? But I already answered this on Slack so many times. Just look on Slack. And no. Slack is not a documentation repository. It's not a Q&A space. I should not be searching Slack, especially because the index in Slack to search stuff, it's rubbish. And in the time we've been discussing this, I already copied the answer that you gave me last week and put it on its rightful place, which is the wiki, because I know that other people that don't usually check Slack will find it. But I'm the team lead. You can ask me anything. Okay, I have a question for you. Have you ever heard about the boost factor? No? Right, perfect. At this point, the dragon was super pissed, and I said, no, I don't need documenting because my code is the documentation, and I use Scala and Erlang, and they are very strongly typed languages, and the types are the documentation. Just read my code, and you will know everything that you need to know. And I said, okay, I have a story for you. This is not the perfect audience today, but bear with me. Have you ever heard about Java's string split or Java's big decimal? Anyone knows what more or less these two methods may do? Right. Let's talk about Java's string split. In Java string split, you have a string and you want to split. Not perfect lightning, but yeah, this is a column. So we would get OOO and then foo and then bow and then do, right? But in string split, there's also a second argument, which is an integer. What does this do? Anyone knows? No? Of course not. When I have a Java audience, they do. The problem is that they don't know what happens in this case. And it's very confusing. And one of the confusing things is that, oh my God, depending, I sometimes get a separator on the output, which is something that I would never expect. But it's on the documentation. And I would only see that if I read the humongous implementation of string split. Or if I read the 3 paragraphs and the very nice examples in the messing documentation. But let's talk about big decimal. Who here knows math? More or less. All right. Big decimal, long, comma, exponent, right? So I have this number in math times 10 power minus 2, or this number in math times 10 power positive 2. So positive 2 minus 2. What would the output here and here be? I know math, right? No, because someone decided that these have to be reversed for some effing reason, right? And you will only know if you read the humongous implementation of value of, which is rather big, or the actual Java doc. So at this point, the dragon had no more arguments. Super pissed, pain, stamping. I see him open his mouth, about to spit a good gulp of fire. I said, hold on, I know what the box is. The box is everything I needed to know. So here's the box. I jump on his mouth. I put the box close like a pill for him to swallow. And I won. So at this point, I was no longer a knight. I had everything I wanted. And I went back to just be a developer. So, with all said, there's only time to review the expectations. I said I would cover these 5 topics, except I lied. You now know that these are not unordered. These are actually ordered items, which are evolve yourself, detect what works and fix it in yourself and hack yourself, build habits to not fall back, find some stakeholders to finally rally the troops, right? Or kicks, tricks, triggers, monies, and troops. Final step, some follow-ups. I've mentioned them early on. If you want to follow my evolution, start here. I cannot stress this enough. I will start every single slide deck with this, right? And with this, some reference. Every image is DALL-E 2, again, unless explicitly stated. The Dragon challenges are based on very useful input from Barcelona Engineering Slack channel. And the triplets, of course, it's copyright by Roser Capdevila and Mercè Company. But I lied again. If you read the meetup invite, you noticed that the title of the talk is The Emperor Has No Dogs. And I didn't deliver on that. So the board witch was bored, and the triplets were causing some mess. So the board witch went and checked up on them and cast them away into the middle of the forest on a split on the road. And they met this guy, this tailor, on his horse. And the tailor said, kids, do you know where the emperor is? And they said, yeah, it's this way, except that was not true. The way to the castle was the other one. So they went to the castle and they impersonated the tailor. And they said, we'll do new dress for you. They asked for some clothes, they took some measurements, they did some designs. And in the morning after, the emperor put the new dress, the new clothes, and he presented himself in front of his peasants. Of course, the board witch showed up for the big event, and she quickly understood that the emperor was dressed like Superman and started mocking him. The emperor took that as a big offense, and he said, guards, take that woman. But she's a witch. She has a broom. Jumped on the broom and went flying away, except she didn't know that the emperor is actually Superman. Thank you very much. This is the emperor's a superhero. Questions? Yeah.
I would add also document as if you were based at 3 a.m. and you need to know what the tracking is.
Love it. 100%. I'll make that edit, please. Yes. Any other question? No? I have a question for you. did I really deliver? Did I fulfill all my promises? Did I follow all the expectations that I shared on the meetup invite? I told you that the main content is these 2 paragraphs, right? And I told you that there's this story about the emperor not having dogs. Did I deliver on this paragraph? No, I did not. I told you I would talk about, or that documentation, like in board games, is necessary for people to understand what's going on, right? So let's talk about Uno. And I'm talking about the official documentation of the game, not custom built instructions and whatnot. Who knows what +4 does? Anyone? Or let me rephrase. Who knows when can I play +4 and what are the consequences? I'm not talking about stacking. You cannot stack +2 and +2. You cannot stack +4, +4. Anyone? No? Okay. And
You can play it if you don't have any other card to play, and the other person can ask you to see the card.
that is almost perfect. There's one last bit missing. So what he said for the recording, you can only play +4 if you cannot play any other card on your hand. You don't have the proper color or the proper number. But the following player, instead of getting 4 immediately, can challenge you. What happens if they challenge you?
I don't remember. I think if they were right, you picked 2 cards. Something like that.
If they challenge you and you could have played something else, you take 8. If they challenge you and you played by the rules, they take 8. But another pet peeve of mine is that this card has an API that's close enough to this one, and it has completely different restriction, and it has similar API to this one, and it has completely different restrictions. And even if you know how to play this one and this one, you will never guess all this mess about this card here. But, next question. Who wins a game of Uno? Who is the winner? Anyone?
The first one that runs out of cards.
No. No. That's a precondition, and that's related to, but that's not a game. That's a round. So what's a game of Uno? In a round of Uno, when you have one card left, you say Uno, then on the last time you play the last card. I win this round, and what happens is that all the other players have to show the remaining cards. We count the numbers, I add those numbers, and those are my points. And the winner of Uno is the first player to 500 points. And this is so important that it's the second sentence on the manual, and it's so important that it has a completely dedicated section called Winning the Game. And yet no one knows. So please read the fucking manual. Someone wrote it. That's all I have.
Ok, gracias, Ignasi. Gracias, Ignasi. Voy a cambiar al castellano, como habíamos empezado. Pues ya hemos acabado por hoy. Gracias, Ferran y Ignasi, por las charladas. Ahora tenemos en el otro lado del edificio, tenemos pizza, bebidas, para hacer un poco de networking, hablar entre nosotros. Simplemente recordar que buscamos gente que quiera dar charlas, así que animaros, igual que han hecho Ignasi y Ferran. Si alguien tiene algo que comentar y demás, nos podéis localizar por las redes sociales, LinkedIn, Meetup, etcétera, etcétera. Y ya sabéis, buscamos gente que nos ayude a organizar, gente que dé charlas, y aquí estamos. Esperemos que el mes que viene tengamos contenido y podamos volver a vernos. Venga, gracias y a disfrutar.